Hope you can hear me right. Okay. So Mujir and I are going to talk about digital retail backbone. And in the past few years, we have been working with retailers across the globe on digital retail backbone. And as Sanjeev mentioned earlier, those retailers are 100-year-old traditional retailers to those who are born digital native. The other thing to note there that there's an acceleration in adopting digital retail backbone, and need of that was really accentuated by pandemic, where where companies or orgs who didn't have a strong core were struggling to pivot in those times. So that was the adversity time. Going forward, there will be changes in post-pandemic days, different models. So for that, most of the retailers will need a strong digital core. So moving on. So if you look back India, if you look at our demographics, there's a huge diversity. And the other thing you will note is that retail sector is still highly unorganized. So that provides a lot of opportunity for retailers. Of course, there's an immense need to handle diversity itself. You will find luxury and cost-conscious buyers. You will find the people who speak different languages, and there are people who are in hinterland and cities like this. So that provides a lot of opportunity to build a core. One of the challenges which happens with most of the organization is they try to solve problem as they come. And as a result, they create a lot of isolated system which don't talk to each other. And as a result, every time you want to pivot, you have to put that extra effort, and sometimes it will slow so much down that you'll have to put exponential effort. So our talk is going to talk about how to avoid that. Sorry. Okay. So what we are talking about that if you have to experiment and pivot, you need a strong common core, and we are calling it as a digital retail backbone. That way. And a digital retail backbone, if created well, could result into many things. It can support very specialized experiences for you. For example, luxury or home improvement and many other things. You can start working networks like ONDC, which is going to come. And you could create multiple formats of your retail and such things. So I think the key point there is to build a solid core which helps you meet your diverse business needs and create the flexibility for you to pivot when you want. So what is digital retail backbone? So at the core of digital retail backbone is your ability to expose your common capabilities in terms of well-factored APIs. So for example, search, browse, checkout, cart, orders are the capabilities which you would like to expose as API. And then you want to use that common capability in a consistent way across your different formats, products, and channels. And that's why your platform needs to be multi-tenanted. So digital retail backbones are also multi-tenanted to take care of various business needs. The third thing you'll notice here is scalable. And given that it's doing most of the heavy lifting, which is required, most of the consumer will, your buyers will end here in the platform. So platform needs to be inherently scalable. So those are the common characteristics of a digital retail backbone. If done well, a digital retail backbone can accelerate your development, right? You can use common capability, you rewire it, and create new products, channels, segments. So you can do that very easily if it is done well. The other thing is that you will be able to experiment and scale on the back of this digital retail backbone. So your ability to pivot increases many times. The other common things, and some of the retailers are trying to take advantage of that, because if you build common capabilities in a more productized way, you can also monetize it. So instead of selling just your products, you can also monetize your platforms. So there are areas and there are retailers, large global retailers, who are also monetizing their common capabilities by just creating a more productized way of creating digital retail backbone. A more diagrammatic view of the same thing. So if you look at that, a digital retail backbone has two layers of capabilities. One is a business capability and other is engineering capability. Those can be used and repeated to create new business diversity for you. Key learnings here. The most important one is DRB is not built on a day. On a single day, you can't go and build it. It evolves over a period of time. So if you want to evolve a DRB and make use for it for your organization, you have to make sure that it's open and modifiable. So one of the key things for creating a digital retail backbone is to have an open and modifiable software as against closed packages. Not all packages are open and modifiable, but there are some which are. And as we all know that when you create DRB, you have to be customer focused because we exist for that. And if you have to be customer focused, I think there will be need of creating consistent experience across the channels where you sell. One of the, for example, you want to buy online and collect at a store. You want to buy at a store and return online. All these experiences should be built using DRB. Mujir, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah. So I hope the mic is good. Everyone can hear? All right. So unfortunately, I've seen a lot of tech platforms being built without talking to the customers. And there's almost a sense of bravado of, build the platform, build the technology platform, users will come. This attitude causes a lot of friction between teams and typically slows down development. What we really need to be doing is doing product thinking for the technology platforms. So just like we do for software that we create for our customers, similar thinking we need to bring in for our developers. So we need to provide great developer experience, so developers are excited to use the platform. Follow the principle of least surprise. So across your technology platforms, how can we bring about consistency? It should be easy to discover capabilities and functionality within the platform, within the tech platform. So do invest in things like developer portals, API catalog, and so on and so forth. And the last point on that I would say is like automate what you can. So I think automation is very useful activity to do. In general, I think for the technology platforms, you want the adoption for developers to be very smooth. So you want to typically get away with any human bureaucracy that may be needed to use the platform. And one of the nice ways of doing it is to create self-service platforms so that it's very easy to onboard developers onto the platform. So I think that is the first point that we wanted to talk about is customer focus, both on the business capabilities as well as on the engineering capabilities. The second important point, and I think data is the talk of the day, but a common digital retail backbone that works across your formats, across different channels, gives you a lot of data about your customers across the formats, across channels, and so on and so forth. So how are you utilizing data to that? Data should be thought of as a first-class construct in any digital retail backbone. One of the learnings for us has been a lot of times people do or think of data later. So I think the earlier you start, you have an advantage of building personalized experiences for your customer incrementally. Before getting onto the second point, I'll just I'll share an example. So we were working with a global retailer where we were building in the e-commerce platform and then the data platform was a separate team. This is a very typical setup in almost all organizations. And their scenario was the e-commerce team was taking a government ID for all the online orders. This was out of India, so they had to take some government ID. And that data used to be passed to the data teams. So all good until one day the e-commerce team implemented social logins. So through Facebook, Twitter, Google, so on and so forth. And when they implemented that, obviously through social media, you do not get the government IDs. So what they ended up doing is passing, the e-commerce team just decided that they will put in a dummy government ID. And this was not communicated to the data team, right? Because everyone is in their own thing. And then what happens is it led to some spurious business insights, and it took almost 2 months to kind of figure out what has happened. So now the question is, whose problem was it? Is it the problem of e-commerce team, or is it the problem of data team? And that's one important learning for us is analytic work should ideally be closer to the teams who's producing the data. So this is an important point, I would say, because a lot of data ownership, data quality issues would be resolved if you do this right. I would highly recommend looking at data mesh if you are implementing any data platforms, because it talks about some of these things around how to go about it.
Yeah, I think it's needless to say the platform exists, the DRB exists to scale your operations. So it needs to be thought as a common capability, and you could think of the common denominator which you have, you build across those things in DRB. For example, I spoke about browse, cart, checkout, orders, catalogs, and all those things. They need to be built in such a way that you can use the same system across, for example, stores or e-commerce. So that's the idea of standardization there.
You could move on. So on the technology side, I think one thing you need to make sure when you're standardizing for scale is what are the common architectural guidelines that you set up for your teams. This could be in terms of very simple things like, say, common naming inventions, error handling, and so on and so forth. Or even how do you define services? How do you define service composability and your layering? The other point is what kind of frameworks do you make available to your teams to get started fast? So say if the team is developing microservices, are there basic templates, self-service templates available for that? Or say even if I'm developing UI widgets, are there basic templates which are available to kind of help the teams get started fast? In general, I would say if you have feature teams, what kind of things do you do to let your feature teams focus just on feature development? So whether it is about templated CI/CD, monitoring, can these be handled horizontally and done by a platform team?
Yeah, I mean, one common question everyone asks that when you build something very standardized and common, will it not slow you down? And what's our learning there? One of the things which we have found that everything you are going to develop as capability needs to be done in a product way, which makes it discoverable to people who are going to develop something easily. So that's one aspect which is very, very important, that it's not only a platform, it's also a product which people can consume easily. The other thing which is important, that whenever the journey need not be taken very lightly, because it often needs a change in your operating model many times, which is business, tech teams, and your ops team who support your business, how they align. So thinking of an operating model which allows for that, a prioritization framework, a thing which is goal-driven, there's measures of success, and there are bets and initiative, which leads to also a self-governance by the team itself. You create squads which are built on the organizational bounded context. Those are a very important aspect when you are going to build. So I would say that there is the plethora of discussion topics, books on this subject. Edge is one such book which is good on operating models.
The other part I think to think about is what do you define in this core? Because when you're saying standardization, should everything go in this common platform, right? And I think that's been a major learning for us, that really the only essential should go in the core DRB. So things which are really common across different formats, channels, those kind of capabilities should be built in the common core. Anything which is specific to a very particular channel or format should ideally be moved outside of the core DRB. So I think that's one key thing to keep in mind. And to do that effectively, you need flexibility in your core so that you can support various needs, right? Some of the ways that I would talk about it is like the common capabilities, how are they configurable? So can I configure capability for different needs so that it operates differently? Or if I can't do that, then how do I build through service composition something on top of the core DRB so that I can still customize and use the core?
So we are at the clock, and so how do you start? It's you want to take that?
I think the couple of slides we might have to just quickly skip out. This in the next one. Yeah, you can skip this, Manish. We're largely at the end of it. Yeah. So just to summarize, I think the 4 key things that we talked about, the 5th one we dropped off just in interest of time. But I think be customer focused when you're doing any engineering or business capabilities. Data is a first class construct. Start early while you're building your platforms. Standardize to scale and design for flexibility. That's largely what we had. I think if we have time, I know we have 50 seconds, we could take a few questions.
Okay. If you have no questions, you have one? Yeah.
One question only, okay?
Was just curious to understand, could you take us through a journey or an example of how you've seen this play out, right, with any of your customers?
Sure. I think Sanjeev mentioned in the panel discussion about a South American retailer. And when the journey started, it was all about e-commerce modernization. And at some point of time, it has to be pivoted and to be made a digital retail backbone, which can also support your stores. At some point of time, and I was talking about evolutionary, open and modifiable, and you have to have that vision in your mind that at some point of time, this will convert into a common capability, not just for e-commerce, but also for others. So we took that, and then over a period of time, we added marketplace and such things on top of that. It's also I was talking about the DRB monetization. So there was also an initiative to create a monetization of that platform. So it has to be built into a product way. So not only the retailer in question can consume that, but many others who are going to eventually use that platform for their retail operations. So that's the journey. Is that?
I would just add on that, it can be a daunting journey. It is a multi-year journey. So you don't need to build everything from day one. So I think it will be evolutionary. It will be incremental. Start with what is the thing that will give you best bang for the buck, right? And then incrementally keep building. So I think that's typically something, as Manish was also adding, it will be an evolutionary thing.
I mean, patience runs thin many times. So if you are going to take months to start rolling out DRB, at least some part of it, it's not going to be successful. So you have to think of incremental creation of the DRB, but it's an evolutionary journey. And it will not be static. Just remember that it's not something which you create once and just leave it, that it will keep working. You have to invest in some of those things, upgrading that.
So I think we are always up for time, but if you have any questions, we would love to catch up during the conference.